Good afternoon. Welcome. I am DeQuay Wilson, your announcer on the Wave Your Grades motivational program, featuring American students dedicating academic excellence to American veterans and our veterans, thanking our students for being serious about their education. Your Wave Your Grades program is brought to you by the Norman Group. For more information on becoming a partner or learning to bridge the five wealth gaps, please contact Willie Norman at 816 525 8708, or you may send him an email at wnorman, the number two, at att.net. And now, here is our host with today's very special guest, veteran Hall of Fame educator, civilian, Carl Boyd.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Wave Your Grades. And indeed, I am civilian educator Carl Boyd, honoring those who have served and asking that young people dedicate their efforts to those who have served. If you are listening to the program as my microphones are dictating to me, we are having two voices simultaneously and we are not saying the same thing. So we will get that cleared up before we ask our very special guest this afternoon to talk a little bit about his background. It is our pleasure to say welcome to Pastor Michael Brooks. Good afternoon.
How you doing, Mr. Boyd? It's a
Truly,
pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
oh, I appreciate you so very much. And please tell us about Michael Brooks, pastor of.
Well, pastor of now the Oasis Church, formerly known as the Zion Grove Baptist Church.
Yes,
That's
sir.
most Kansas Cityans will remember us.
Yes.
But we're changing locations and changing our name and rebranding, and so we'll be known as the Oasis Church probably within the next few weeks or so.
Thank you very much. I feel like we are in on a very positive development that will go forward, and we will try to keep up with you as developments occur.
No doubt, no doubt.
You heard in our introduction that our program is aimed at motivating American students to dedicate excellence to those who have served. And that saying is American students striving for excellence in honor of our troops. That's what the program is about. And we ask exemplary service personnel to motivate them by who they are and what they do. So by way of introduction, if you would, some background, please, and we will work our way up to what is going on in these times.
Well, I am a proud alum of Central High School here in Kansas City. Graduated in 1980, and didn't go on the college path because of a lot of different factors, but ended up staying in the city and just working for the Internal Revenue Service for a few years. And then decided I'd try the military. So my father did a tour in the Korean War. Had a couple of cousins that were in the Army during the Vietnam War, and so always had kind of a desire to check out the military. So I ended up joining the Air Force and left here in 1982 and served 10 years in the Air Force. And then at the end of my tour, was certified and trained as a substance abuse counselor for the Air Force. And so those 10 years really saved my life. If it hadn't been for the military, I'm not sure where I would have ended up. But it got me out of Kansas City, got me off the streets of Kansas City, and really gave me not only a career, but really an opportunity to travel the breadth of the United States as well. And so did that for 10 years, got out in 1992, and while I was in there, I also started a ministry as a preacher. While I was in Alaska, I started preaching in 1985, and so coming up on 35 years of being a preacher. This year, matter of fact, next month, it'll be 20 years that I've been the pastor of Zion Grove Baptist Church. So I came back here in 1998. Married my wife in 1999, Mabel Olivia Johnson Brooks, who is the best woman this side of heaven. And then started pastoring Zion Grove in 2000. And so it's been 20 years. I can't even believe it when I think about it. It makes me shiver. It's been 20 years. And so that's kind of my background. That's kind of what I've been doing for the last 20 years or so.
You know how we have shaped, even though certainly you're not as old as I, but old enough to remember the cliche and how we have been compelled to restate it. Back in the day, behind every man is a good woman, and we have been compelled to change that cliche. So please go ahead, reshape it for us because of what you just said.
Be alongside or
Praise
sometimes
God.
ahead of.
Thank you very much. Thank you very.
Sometimes more forward thinking than we are. So, but no, it's been a joy. Certainly been a journey. So I wouldn't suggest to anybody that marriage is a piece of cake, but it takes work on both people's part. As long as you're committed to it and committed to Christ, I think He has a way of working out all the rough places.
Praise God. Praise God. And you know that I share with you along those lines, and wonderful Wanda is tuned into the program.
Hello, Wanda. Always good to hear you.
She will understand what I mean when I say, if you hear Pastor Michael Brooks say marriage is not a piece of cake, when I say that it is the ice cream, she will understand what what I mean. But let me say to you that when I think about your tenure, and I didn't know how many years it had been because you are a young man, the evolution of service. Our pastor, Isaac Petrie Sr. in Arizona at Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, defined being a pastor as a burdensome joy. And when you think about your tenure and some of what you have encountered and see going on, how has the evolution of your service manifested?
If I had to tag it something, I would say the calm in the midst of storms. That the life is constantly throwing storms and trauma and stresses. And at the end of the day, even though we may need some help from time to time, we're expected to be that calm force in the midst of everybody's troubles and trials and storms that are going on in their lives. And then also even what's going on with our world right now. I think there ever was a time our society, our world needs to hear a common voice and the voice of God and the voice of reason. It's right now. And so I've been praying for pastors and leaders all over this country that we'll all be able to handle this tense situation and continue to lead God's people in the right way.
One of the things that we will not get around discussing, excuse me, is the role of young people in shaping tomorrow. We cannot get around that. But Pastor Michael Brooks, eternally, there are certain things that are fixed that do not change. Right. And being a theologian, being a pastor, what are some of those things that we rely upon that indeed are fixed?
Well, just our basic belief, again, that God is supreme, that He's God. No matter what's going on with us, what's going on in the world, He stays the same. The Bible says He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So although culture changes, although times change, although seasons change, we serve a faithful and consistent God that I believe remains the same. I think our understanding of Him changes, our interpretation of Him may change, but He in His essence has always been the same.
When I think about 1968, the Democratic National Convention, Chicago, Illinois, I was on Michigan Avenue outside of the Conrad Hilton Hotel where the Democratic candidates and representatives were staying. The convention was at the amphitheater. As a matter of fact, one of the marchers who happened to be there at the same time, though we did not know each other at that time, was Reverend Sam Mann. And we have shared one of our favorite stories from that occasion. But Mayor Richard Daley, Chicago, Illinois, issued a shoot-to-kill order. What he said was, if there are demonstrators, shoot to maim. If there are looters, shoot to kill.
Wow.
We found ourselves at one point in that demonstration with the hippies and the yippies and the black community running down Michigan Avenue away from tanks and jeeps and the Chicago Police Department. When I look at that, and when you have read about that, how might we compare what is going on to what was going on at this time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. I certainly believe that our nation made a grave mistake in militarizing our police forces, and what we've seen over the last few weeks, I think, really has done some damage that's going to take some time to repair. Although the looting and the pillage and all that was certainly something that need to be handled, I think we just lumped everybody in the same bunch and handled all of them as if they were combatants in a war. And it's amazing how even some of that language was being used during this time. So I think it was eerie similar to what was going on, but I do think it was a little different in that what we're fighting and what the protest was about was not just about civil rights and not just about social injustices, but just the pure right to life. And I think that's what's resonated with so many people, black, brown, white, and other, that people should have the right to live and not have to worry about being killed at the hands of the police.
Let me remind those who are listening that our program is Wave Your Grades. This program is for veterans and students, veterans motivating students towards excellence, students dedicating excellence to veterans. We are privileged this afternoon, we are honored to have as our very special guest an Air Force veteran as well as local pastor, the Reverend Michael Brooks, who also has distinguished himself in public service. Your announcer is DeQuay Wilson. My name is Carl Boyd, host, and of course, DeQuay, anytime you want to jump in, please do. But Pastor Brooks mentioned the term the militarization of police forces, not local but nationally. So let me ask of you the question as it relates to calls for defunding, abolishing, reorganizing. Where does Pastor Michael Brooks come where those things are concerned?
Well, I think we have to understand that all those are individual local entities, and so I think local governments are going to decide how they're handled. Certainly, there can be some guidelines from the federal government, or even some guidelines from the state government. Here in Kansas City, though, one of the things that we need to work on is making it a total local environment. Right now, we're governed by the state. Mm-hmm. We're the only police force in the nation that does not have local control. And so we have to work on that just here locally in Kansas City to begin with. But then how police forces are functioning, how well they're functioning, I think is something that has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. In some cases, if the police force is totally just corrupt and the citizens have no trust whatsoever, then there may need to be a total change, a total reorganization. The budgets for police forces in most cities sometimes top any other budget. So we set that stage up during in the 80s when we started the war on drugs and the drawing down of military forces because we're no longer in the Cold War, and some of those pieces of equipment were just handed over to local police forces. And so that's kind of how it got there. I'm not sure there's a need for all that now, and certainly the way we show up to incidents certainly doesn't require all of that any longer. So I think it's going to have to be an individual local task that's taken on by mayors and council people and deciding what's going to be best for the local community. Again, I think here in Kansas City, we definitely have to work on local control and then some type of independent citizen review board when it comes to police misconduct, because right now we don't have that, and most cities don't have that. And so one of the things you've heard coming out of this in a lot of cities, they are putting those things in place so that there is some independent party that can investigate when police do conduct themselves in a way that could be criminal. Because as long as the police are policing the police, there's probably going to be very few charges, very few punitive things happen. And then the other thing is, even if something does happen, an officer does do some things that cause him to lose his job. He could leave Kansas City and just go over to Prairie Village or go over to Lee Summit or go over to Independence and get a job right back. And so that's some of those things I think need to be handled in that there needs to be a register of police officers that have had misconduct so that even though they go to another community, that community knows what kind of person they may be hiring.
In fact, I think that was the situation with young Tamir Rice when that officer had been elsewhere and reprimanded elsewhere. Now, when we think in terms of George Floyd, there has been a flood, if you will, of identifications of those who have been victimized by those who are in positions of authority. So much has been said about the relationship of the community to local law enforcement. Pastor Michael Brooks, your tenure in public service goes beyond police community relations, and in as much as we have the attention of America and the world, like no other time I can remember, what are other things on our agenda that we need to list?
Well, again, I think just rethinking our response to again what was peaceful protest. I think the media has a whole lot to do with how we are perceived and how even the news is presented. Because if all you're showing is just the stores being looted and just the stores being burned, you're not showing the peaceful protesters that weren't there to do that. So whenever you have a large group of people, the majority may wish to be out there for the right reason. You can't really determine or even deter sometimes some rogue individuals who may try to mess up the environment for everybody. And I think that's what happened. There was so much attention placed on the looting and the burning, we lost what the real reason was why the protest was going on in the first place. And so I think the media has a great responsibility to tell the whole story and not just symbolize the story just for the sake of getting ratings and just for the sake of having a hot story or a hot clip in the news. I've seen on social media just tons of interactions with police officers and some of those crowds where the police officers are engaging and talking, and some were even dancing. You didn't see any of that on the news, but some individuals who were posting those things on Facebook and on Instagram and other places, you could see that it was not just a volatile environment. But if you only looked at the news, all you saw was this tension between the crowds and the police. And certainly there was some. Certainly there was some incidents where tear gas and other things were used and force was used that really didn't need to be used. But again, I think those officers were following their commands. And when the command comes from the White House that when you loot, we're going to shoot, that gives the mentality to those individuals in uniform that they have free reign to kind of do whatever they want to do. I was really grateful and proud of our mayor, the way he handled it and how he pulled the police officers back after a few days and let the protests go on. I'm not sure how, the details of how other cities handle it, but I do think our mayor, Quentin Lucas, did an excellent job on pulling the police officers back. Even though there were some incidents, there were some situations that were questionable, and I think there's some investigations going on into those things. Overall, Kansas City was not one of those cities where things got out of hand.
I would pray that those who are involved and those with expectations, hopefully high expectations, realize that the changes we seek are not going to take place overnight.
No. It's taken us years to get here. I do think there's a different energy this time.
Yes.
In that from Trayvon all the way up to Michael Brown and others, although there were protests when those happened, this one did feel a little different. And it did feel more unifying in that it wasn't just black people saying this is wrong, there were tons of people of all nationalities and all colors saying, we've got to do something about this. So the real rainbow that we say America is, I think, is starting to show itself. I think those of us that are older, that are seasoned, need to be involved in giving these young people our wisdom as far as what we have gone through. Not curtailing their energy, not curtailing their passion, because they deserve to be that way. Matter of fact, that's what we need. I had to remind somebody, y'all do know that Martin Luther King was in his 30s when he was doing all that marching.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
for
Yes.
point of reference, those of us that are close to 60 probably don't fit that mold. So let's push, let's encourage these 18, 20,
That's right.
and
That's
30
right.
and 40-year-olds
Yes.
to be the energy behind the movement, but still use our wisdom on how to operate and how to proceed. And we may not see things eye to eye all the time, but the good thing is we have multi-generations coming together, sitting down at the table and hashing things out on what's the best way to go forward.
Well, let me say this to you, and with prayers, and DeQuay Wilson, I do mean prayers when I say this, that it is all right to share with you an interchange I had recently, because I have developed an 8-hour workshop on police community relations, and there was some interest shown in that. Oh, I think I did share that at the meeting you chaired with the Shepherds.
On the Friday call, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Well, let me tell you that one of the subtitles in part of that presentation goes like this, and I'll tell you what the person asked of me when I said it. Please remember George Floyd, but don't forget Cortez Wilson. So when I made that statement, the gentleman said, "Oh yeah, wait, was that young man killed by the police?" I said, No. This is my point. In our community, let us be very sensitive to those things that are imposed from without, but let us never forget what we too often do to ourselves from within.
Right.
Cortez Wilson. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
And I think that's why it's so important that we find a way to come together, because no one of us is going to solve everything. But for the people that are passionate about solving the George Floyd issue and trying to get some real change around policing in America, if that's your passion, then you need to do that. But I also think there's some people very passionate about this black on black crime in our community that do want, and I don't think either of the subject needs to be muddied. It doesn't have to be an either or.
Thank you.
I think we need to do both and.
Thank you. Now, one of the other things, again, unless DeQuay Wilson wants to come in, I just want to not change the subject totally, but expand upon what we are discussing.
I just want to thank Reverend Brooks for saying that, because that's something that I say in the conversations that I have. You know, you and I have spoken, Carl, and I think that when we only look at, and don't misunderstand me, because I completely understand the history of policing in America.
Yes.
I do.
Yes.
So I do not take this lightly, but at the same time, how can we tell you do as I say and not as I do? If we're going to address one issue, we have to also address the other. So I just want to thank you for saying that. You echo my sentiments.
No doubt.
Great.
So I don't know if you've heard, and you may want, if you haven't, I think I posted on my Facebook post, Pat Clark and some other individuals are gathering a march down to Martin Luther King Park on Monday.
Yeah, it starts at 4:30.
To bring to light the black on black crime.
Yeah, I saw the email.
Yeah.
Praise God. Now, we are going to take a very, very brief break. As a matter of fact, Louis George Walker, in the old days, we would say station identification.
Right. Okay.
So please stay with us, and let me turn it over to our announcer, DeQuay Wilson.
Thank you. Again, Wave Your Grades is brought to you by the Norman Group. For more information on becoming a partner or learning to bridge the 5 wealth gaps, please contact Willie Norman. You may reach him by phone at 816-525-8708, or you may reach him by email at wnorman2@att.net. Again, that's 816-525-8708, or wnorman, the number 2, at att.net. We are back with Wave Your Grades. As always, I am your announcer, DeQuay Wilson, here again with our special guest, host, civilian educator, Carl Boyd.
And our very special guest, Pastor Michael Brooks. Is it Oasis Missionary Baptist Church or Oasis Baptist Church?
It'd be just the Oasis Church. We're
the Oasis Church.
Yeah.
And when we think about how passionate we are right now, Saturday, June 13th, about things that are going on, including a pandemic, and certainly including what is going on with police community relations, Pastor Brooks, community activist, can you also share with us some of the other issues we must not allow to get lost while we're talking about crime, while we're talking about imminent death in some cases? There are some other things that we might need to focus upon. What might those things be?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, I think one of the things we have to do is help people hone in on what they're passionate about, on what changes they want to be directly involved in. And certainly there are a number of areas when it comes to us as people that I think we still have a long way to go before we evolve into equality or equity or whatever, whichever word you choose to use. And so I really believe the economic empowerment of our people has become a major part of how we move forward because we still are living in this capitalistic society. And the fact that we are spending between 1.3 to 1.5 trillion dollars in this United States on a yearly basis means that we're not all poor, but I think we just haven't been taught or haven't been using our resources in the best way to galvanize the power that we have. So economic education, I think, is a major part of how we move forward. Education in general, I think the fact that we have defunded our schools and urban schools all over America are failing our students. That's another organization, another entity that may need to be totally, imploded and start all over again. With some individuals really have educating our children as a priority, as opposed to collecting money and raising money and getting paid for every head that's in the seat. Education has always been a major portion of a major role we need to play in coming out of wherever we are. So this whole centralized poverty and the ghettos and the neighborhoods that we have just totally disinvested in, we've got to take a serious look at that. And every city which says to me it's not by accident, if the same conditions exist in every city, urban schools are the ones that are performing poorly. Has nothing to do with the quality of the children. It has to do with the quality of education. And so how do we improve the quality of education so whether I'm living in Lee Summit or I'm living on 30th and Paseo, I get the same education. And that's just not happening right now. So I think education, economics, I'm working with Moore Square, who's still focused on social justice and social issues. We're hoping that Medicaid expansion gets passed in Missouri, now that's on the ballot. So people's medical condition is another thing, again, we got to take seriously. So when it comes to this whole COVID-19, our community got affected disproportionately because some of us are not very healthy. We're not very healthy because we don't access the healthcare system. We don't access the healthcare system sometimes because we don't have health insurance. And so it's a vicious cycle that just continues until we stop the cycle and reevaluate it. I'm not sure we're going to get off this merry-go-round anytime soon.
Now, our program, as was stated in the introduction and repeated, asks American students to dedicate their excellence to American troops, American veterans, in schools or right now via social media. If there are those who would like to hear from Pastor Michael Brooks for in-person presentations or via social media, what is the best way to contact Pastor Brooks?
You can reach me on Facebook. I'm just Pastor Brooks on Facebook and Instagram. You can also reach me by email. It's pastorm.brooks@gmail. And if you get a phone call from somebody that wants my number, you have my permission to share my number. Not sure I need to get that out over the airways.
No.
And we're in between locations, so that we don't have a physical location for a church building just yet. But you certainly reach me by email or on social media.
One of the things that we have asked you to share, and I want to thank you so much for giving us your military background. One of the reasons that I ask young people to dedicate their pursuit of excellence to those who make it possible for them to go to school is because too often young people do not learn well because they don't have a purpose for learning. They don't have an incentive. I am asking them to use as an incentive. I have a saying for every day of the year. And one that I use is, you cannot look in a hero's eyes and be a student who never tries. That there is a connection with attempting to make America better. Pastor Michael Brooks is a resident in the Kansas City community. How well do we do locally learning from and or interacting with other municipalities from here to Seattle, Washington?
I'm not sure. Certainly haven't been in politics. I could say we do good, but I'm not sure the average citizen knows how they engage in different communities. The Kaufman Foundation is sponsoring, and I don't know if you've been on one of the tours in their education foundation, a tour of certain professionals in the city that goes and tours other cities to see what they're doing in education, to see what are the innovative ways that they're teaching children, try to bring those things back. So that's one of the ways I think we engage other communities. Certainly our city council has the National League of Cities and other places where, again, they go and compare notes and try to figure out what's working, what best practices. But the average person that just wakes up and go to work every day probably doesn't know any of those things even going on. So I do think it is incumbent upon those of us that are leaders to go get those bits and pieces of ideas and try to come back and see what will work here in Kansas City. So there's a lot of engagement. I'm not sure the engagement gets to the streets as often as it needs to.
Well, now, when we think in terms of places from where we might get a few ideas, how would Kansas City do if a contingent from another municipality came to learn something from Kansas City? Do we have anything that we might boast about or might help someone else with?
Wow. Something that Kansas City does well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy.
Well, you started our program with one. Has not been perfect, but we've done pretty well as it relates to protests versus riots. So one of the things.
Yeah, and I think this coming together this time certainly was different, and that's why I said it was a different feel. I think you had all kind of different people coming from all parts of even municipality. I'm not sure everybody was even from Kansas City, but people were coming from all over the region and coming together. The concern or the hope that I have is that when the protesting is over, we'll still keep coming together to come up with solutions. So the question that's being raised now is, now after the marching and after the looting and after the screaming and shouting, now what? And that now what question is imperative as to whether or not people are going to keep coming to the table to come up with solutions. I do think we have tons of people in Kansas City that have professionalism and the expertise and the background to be creative and innovative. I'm just not sure we're always brought to the table at the same time. And so the silos and isolation, I think, is what keeps Kansas City from progressing as much as we could. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to put those differences aside and start coming together and see what we can do as a whole.
One of the things that I talk about subtitles that I use from time to time, and one of the subtitles in presentations that I make is, quote, "after the cameras stop rolling," unquote. because it's a lot more important what we do when we're not looking for a breaking news headline,
No doubt.
and what
No
we
doubt.
do on an ongoing basis. And here's something that was coincidental, perhaps, or being a Christian, I might suggest providential. But I mentioned incidentally that at the 1968 Democratic National Convention on Michigan Avenue, Reverend Sam Mann and I were marching with Dick Gregory, and he and I share an anecdote that has a little bit of amusement in it, but believe me, protesting the Vietnam War was not funny. But Mayor Daley had the deputy chief of police confront Dick Gregory, and he said, Mr. Gregory, this is an unlawful assembly. If you do not disperse immediately, we will have to begin to effect arrests. Dick Gregory said, yes, sir, and kept talking. And as a matter of fact, we decided to march anyway. So we got to 18th in Michigan, and the deputy chief stopped us again, and we were somewhat surrounded, and he said, Mr. Gregory, you have been warned. This is an unlawful assembly. It was about 3,000 of us in the street. Dick Gregory looked back and said, unlawful assembly? Man, I just called my wife. She's fixing some fried chicken for my friend. We were running from tanks and jeeps and bayonets and the Chicago Police Department.
Wow.
But I mentioned it, the fact that Reverend Mann and I were sharing that story because of his tenure as a leader in the movement, and your relationship more so, but our relationship with Reverend Bob Hill. And one of the things that we have found from an historical perspective is the movement has never been a black movement, but it has been a righteous movement.
No doubt.
So again, as we talk about relationships in Kansas City being an example, how do you fix that as it relates to what we call multiculturalism or cultural diversity and what I call cultural commonality?
I think there's a couple of things. I think certainly the church has had to evolve in that some of the fights of the '60s are not the same fights. So although there are still injustices, I think we are able now to drill down and get even more specific. Because what we're finding now is you can have policies in place, but if you have people in place that are not enforcing the policy, that becomes a whole other issue. You'll find that there's a whole lot of laws on the books that should keep people from doing certain things, but if the laws are not being enforced, and if they're being enforced unequally when it comes to African American or white counterparts, the justice system just is another one of those systems that has to be addressed. But our moral position has to remain that we're speaking on God's behalf. And is this how, when we're talking about people in general, is this how God will want his people treated? And if there's some untreatment, and I don't care if it's at the hand of black people or white people, whatever the case may be, our foundation has to be what is our godly response to it? And anytime there is injustice, I think it's the church's responsibility to speak to it and not just to complain about it, but also try to come up with some solutions. And so we could be the conveners, we could be the middle ground, we could be the impartial individuals that can bring both sides together. And in the sake of having a moral ground to stand on, that we actually try to bring some peace to some very volatile situations that way. And I think we've been able to do that. I think, just like you said, some of the relationships that we have now with some of our white brothers and even Jewish and Muslim brothers as well. There's not a Christian thing, although that's my faith. We have to evolve to the point where we have to respect each other's faith, even though it may not be mine. But all of us are in our faith tradition, certainly a way that we should be treating our fellow man. And so regardless of what your faith is, that faith is always going to have something about love, always going to have something about compassion, always going to have something about forgiveness. And those things become kind of the pillars I think we can rebuild what has been torn down.
One of the things that you mentioned was bringing sides together. Will you also speak a moment, if you would, about bringing generations together, the role of those who
Yeah,
are younger than we?
yeah, and that's kind of been my rallying cry for years that we
Hmm.
have to make space and make room for this generation. Well, now we're not going to have to make space. We're just going to agree with the space they're occupying, so they're not asking anymore. And I think these presentations, these protests have proven they're not asking for a seat at the table anymore. And in some instances, I think we need to create our own table. Stop asking for a seat at other people's tables that are not going to welcome us. But I do believe there's value in every generation. Um, Getting every generation to say that is the goal. That the younger generation uh, certainly has things they can offer that we don't have, and vice versa. If we can ever get minds together to think that way, that there's every voice, there's value in every face, there's value in every person, and even if I disagree with you, there's still value in what you say because your perspective may not be wrong, it's just different. And we have to stop calling things wrong just because they're different. Just because I think differently
Mm.
doesn't make me
Mm.
wrong. It just and God made us different on purpose. Nobody has the same fingerprint. Nobody has the same DNA. I don't think we're supposed to be all. But when we all come together and then are able to contribute what we are good at, I think that makes the whole much better. And I think we just have to be more welcoming. We have to be more accepting.
Yes.
Love them, and not try to make them into who we think they need to be, but respect who they are and make some space for them.
I can remember when I was a little younger that we had the audacity in the late 50s and particularly into the 60s to actually use the terms. And Sister DeQuay, forgive me, but Uncle Tom's and Aunt Thomasina's. And
Hmm.
we wanted the old folks to get out of the way because we knew what we were doing and we were
Right,
leading this movement and we were
right.
militant and they were acquiescent. Well,
Hmm.
it kind of looks like I'm about the age of those I talked about, and young people have really have really been kind of kind to us.
Yeah, 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 and I agree. And I'm, as I said before, I'm 20 years into this tenure and Grove at the time. But and at the same time, we were the young guns and we were the young guys that were going to have turned the city around, and we had the same, tension between the younger guys and the older guys.
Hmm.
And while as the years were progressing, we even talked about how we don't want to create the same environment that their age, that we don't want to have the same blocks and the
Praise
same
God.
negative conversations about them as we're being had. So here we are now, 20 years later. Most of us are well into our 50s, going on 60s, and these younger guys, I think, could use. And in some instances, I've been kind of. It took me a minute to get okay with younger preachers calling me saying, "I need you to mentor me." Because I was like, man, I'm still. You want me? I'm still kind of young myself.
No, no,
But you
no.
just keep progressing,
Th-
and as the 50s
That's
keep
right.
on, because after 50 it's just a number after that. So
Well, they're
knocking on the door of 60, I can accept it now.
no,
And if
they
there's
they're
anything I can do to help younger people, I'm more than willing to do that.
they're calling on you because you have already become all you were mentor be.
Yeah,
So
and I think there's some value in even the struggle, because if you're gonna pastor, if you're gonna lead anything, there's gonna be a struggle attached to it.
the-
People look at the limelight and look at Sunday morning and look at what we do, but they have no idea what it takes behind the scenes. And I think that's where we can help on what happens behind the scenes. That there's things, and one of the things about this protest, I think that again could have been learned. You know very well that in the '60s there were pre-meetings before the protest,
yes.
and even in community organizing with more spread and other groups, we still do that as well. We don't just jump out there. We have
All
pre-meetings and
right.
we teach people how to do peaceful protests. And again, you
Oh
can't
yes.
stop the agitators from joining, but we're going to be responsible for our actions and make sure that we're policing each other. And that started happening in some of the crowds, but I think a lot of that again just had to do with if we had taken the time to get some training on how to do it effectively, some of the marches could have been, I think, a lot more effective than they were.
Well, as a matter of fact, when I invoked the Uncle Tom and Thomasina line, Louis George Walker, founder of KUAW.org, president of Black Family Technology Awareness Association, was chuckling a little bit and shaking his head. Now, I don't want to suggest that he was necessarily guilty of those kinds of attitudes, but let me tell you this, hearing from Pastor Michael Brooks DeQuay and observing Louis George Walker, whose Black Family Technology Awareness Association involves the youngest among us learning how to close that digital divide, and being not only willing, Louis George Walker, to do it, but advocating strongly and looking for opportunities to involve younger people. So, Pastor Brooks, your leadership in that arena can be helpful to more than just those you're in contact with.
No doubt, no doubt. I think as you know, say this tongue in cheek, as the older generation, we look for those opportunities.
Yes, sir.
And a
Yes,
lot
sir.
of times ask young people,
Thank
rather
you.
than just infusing our ideas,
Yes.
ask them if we can help. Ask them where can we help. If they got a plan, I don't need to go and overtake the plan and tell them, no, do it this way.
Watch out.
Show me how I can help you execute your plan.
Now you're talking.
Show me how I can help, and vice versa. The older generation needs to ask the younger generation, how can you all help us to come up to speed, to get technology astute, to help us with those things that we may not be that we're very well versed in. So it's a both end. I think the more we can get together, the more we can merge the generations. And it's one of the things I love about my church. We have almost every generation there is.
There you go.
That exists.
Praise
from the
God.
90s all the way down to the newborns and everything in between.
Yes, sir.
And I think if we can help model what that needs to look like, that's one of the reasons why again we want to change the whole mantra of the church and the name and the mission, vision, and everything, so we can start being the church and not just coming to church.
Praise God. If DeQuay Wilson doesn't have a question and or a comment, let me ask of you as a means of coming to the close of this particular episode of the program, and then, of course, closing again with contact information. But asking you this concluding question, what do you see, and you have certainly touched on it, but even in a succinct passage, as something that makes Pastor Michael Brooks optimistic about where we're going?
Well, I think the most optimism I have is that we've seen hard days before, and the same God that helped us get through the Middle Passage and chattel slavery,
praise
and
God, come on,
and all the other things. He's the same God.
Yes,
and
sir.
As I said in the beginning, He has not changed. I think our presentation of Him needs to change. I think our understanding of Him needs to change. I think our representation of Him needs to change. So that this generation understands that He does still exist and He does have a major role to play, even if it's not you coming to a church building. And I think that's one of the blessings of COVID-19, that we have proven that the church can still be the church and not have to go to a building to do it. So that's what gives me hope, that I think God has forced us to make some changes we wouldn't have made had we not been placed in these tense situations.
Cannot thank you enough, and please, as we close out, contact information one more time.
Sure, you can reach me by email at pastorm.brooks@gmail. I'm Pastor Brooks on Facebook, and then m.ebrooks on Instagram. And we are live streaming all of our services on Sunday at 10:15, on Wednesday night Bible study at 6:30. And you're certainly more than happy to have you join us. Please, if I can help in any way, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you don't remember any of those things, you know who Carl Boyd is, and he knows how to get in touch with me
Yes,
at any time. There are some numbers you just answer when you see the caller ID. So he's one of those people. So any way I can help, I'm more than happy to.
Praise God. We thank you so very, very much, and we shall be calling on you again. And, oh, by the way, in the introduction, DeQuay Wilson did say civilian Carl Boyd. So I wanted to be known. My oldest brother was a Marine. Next to him was an airman. Next to him was a soldier. I did not serve. So I don't want anybody to get that confused. So thank you for everything, and we will talk again soon. God bless you.
All right. Thank you for having me. Thank you, DeQuay.
Thank you.
All right. This is Wave Your Grades on KUAW.org. Don't forget, KUAW stands for knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And as we think about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, how many different ways can we be heard?
Tune in.
Tune in. You can get my Periscope. There you go. Periscope, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's what I was forgetting. And YouTube to reach KUAW.org. And if you have a Google, Alexa. Play KUAW. Alexa, are you listening? But at any rate, we'll be talking more about that because KUAW.org has some very progressive moves coming up that will be as inclusive as you can get. And we want very much for that participation to go out into, quote, all the land. And when you say www, World Wide Web, we're not just talking about Greater Kansas City. So please keep us in mind. And here is your announcer, DeQuay Wilson.
I want to say, talk about heroes you didn't know were heroes. I had no idea of Pastor Brooks' military background. But to close today's Wave Your Grades program, our host will recite one of his daily, year-round morning motivational messages for students in honor of our troops. I am DeQuay Wilson. Here is Carl Boyd.
And in as much as we have a few more minutes on the clock, I get an opportunity to elaborate on the fact that even in as much as there has been a shutdown order that is being released slowly, we still have a variation on the theme of distance learning. So we have not had students, DeQuay, in the studio for how long? It's been 2 months probably.
Been a few months.
Yeah, it's been a while.
March maybe.
So I think maybe so.
Since maybe was it February?
It might have been, and consider that this is the middle of June. That is pretty amazing. But we did have the opportunity to hear from Syria Shields, but that was not in studio. She read her essay on heroes you didn't know were heroes about Carl Evans. And we want to assure you that we will be calling on young people to pay their tributes to veterans, those who have served. And if they happen to be active duty in service at this time, we want to recognize them as well. So we will be talking to our students, allowing those students to talk to us. Do not forget that we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have served. And you know what, as it relates to the fact that in as much as I've got a couple of minutes, one of the ways that I would love to put in context to what we are going through now, when you're looking at what's happening in the streets, when you are looking at the strife, when you are looking at the divisiveness in our America coming from the top, when you see those things that are going on, our program is dedicated to veterans. Our program is dedicated to those who fight. There is no excuse in the United States of America to deploy somebody to go into battle, as it were, and come home to conditions worse than where they have to serve in foreign lands. We have a responsibility to get this stuff right because there are people who are fighting for this to happen. And just in case there's anybody who thinks that wave your grades, and we use that term, wave your grades, as opposed to waving the flag, because sometimes even the term waving the flag denotes something negative. You're just a flag waver. No. Wave your grades. Do something that is concrete, but with a purpose. Doc Bass, I remember his relevance of intelligence. The relevance is that there are people who are fighting for us who need to come home to peace. And if we put it in that perspective, then we would not have the Michael Brooks and the Carl Evans come home to some mess that was created by us. So we have a responsibility to them and to our young people and their future to get it right. Indeed, this is Wave Your Grades, KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom. We always close with the morning message for this day. So had you gone to Stoots for Boots and clicked on to the morning messages, this is what you heard. This is what you will hear on June 13th. To students across the USA, your Stoots for Boots message for this day, June 13th. OMG, our military's great. BFF, being first forever. June 13th, OMG, our military's great. BFF, being first forever. This is Wave Your Grades. Thank you so much. Our producer, announcer, co-host, and engineer, DeQuay Wilson, founder and engineer and teacher, Louis George Walker. Thank you very much for our very special guest, Reverend Pastor Michael Brooks. My name is Carl Boyd. Gracious God and wonderful Wanda, I'm on my way home.